Next item is, again, John Kemp, the update on the Carlsbad Boulevard, College Boulevard, and Tamarack traffic calming enhancements.
Thank you, Vice Chair Johnson. This presentation was originally given to City Council on September 24th of last year. I think I've kept the Commission notified of our inability to bring it before Traffic and Mobility Commission prior to bringing it to Council. It was one of those items that was scheduled during the work plan formulation. But I do want to present this again as an informational item to the Commissioners. Some of the background for this particular item. City Council requested staff bring back specific traffic calming analysis for the following corridors. College Boulevard from Carlsbad Village Drive to Sage Creek, Tamarack Avenue from Skyline Road to Carlsbad Boulevard, and Carlsbad Boulevard from Agua Herriana Trailhead to State Street. On June 3rd of 2019, the Traffic Safety Commission didn't support staff's recommendation for an all-way stop on Tamarack at Valley and recommended that staff consider alternative solutions, so we wrapped that into the presentation. I'll probably skip over some of the traffic calming basics Lindy covered already. But I do want to mention that traffic calming on non-residential streets, which would be outside of the Carlsbad Residential Traffic Management Program, specifically are treated a little bit differently. Carlsbad Boulevard, College Boulevard, and Tamarack Avenue are not residential streets as defined by the CRTMP, and therefore we had to develop some unique strategies based on the recommendations that we found in the general plan mobility element. Wanted to go over some past efforts that staff has implemented on Carlsbad Boulevard specifically to increase mobility and safety. In 2012, we performed an overlay in which we introduced buffered bike lanes on the boulevard. In 2012, we implemented a pedestrian scramble phase at Carlsbad Village Drive and Grand Avenue. Between 2013 and 2015, we installed enhanced crosswalks and rectangular rapid flashing beacons on Carlsbad Boulevard between Tamarack and Oak. In 2014 is when we installed the roundabout and trail at State Street. In 2014-15, we had a bridge railing project that installed sidewalks and restriped Carlsbad Boulevard. And finally, in 2018, we did a slurry seal that enhanced the pedestrian crossing at the Army-Navy Academy crosswalk, as well as increase some on-street parking. The general plan mobility element has some specific recommendations based on the typology. Carlsbad Boulevard is posted currently in that region at 30 miles per hour per an engineering and traffic survey. It's classified as an identity street in the general plan mobility element. For identity streets, the mobility element recommends traffic calming devices such as curb extensions, which are bulb outs, or enhanced pedestrian crossings should be considered and evaluated for implementation. Based on this guidance, staff recommends improvements at the existing marked crosswalks at Hemlock Avenue, Cherry Avenue, Maple Avenue, Sycamore Avenue, Oak Avenue, as well as the Army-Navy Academy crosswalk. Improvements consisting of curb extensions where feasible, pedestrian activated in-pavement flashing lights, which would augment the existing rectangular rapid flashing beacons that are already in place, convert to the new continental-style high-visibility crosswalk markings and to treat any bicycle conflict areas in green paint. These are the locations in which staff is recommending those listed improvements. Here are some examples of what those improvements might look like. Curb extensions on the left, and then the in-pavement flashing lights. An example is shown on the right. This is one intersection where we've laid out what the proposed features would look like. As you note, on that orange curb extension area, we could only do that in areas of Carlsbad Boulevard where there's on-street parking. Otherwise, there would be no room to provide a curb extension. So that's where the where feasible part comes in. So where feasible, we would incorporate a curb extension to shorten the pedestrian crossing. And then we would implement or install in-pavement flashing lights to both approaches, and they would work in conjunction with existing push-button activated rectangular rapid flashing beacon systems that we already have. And then here's an example of where the bike lane ends, that conflict area we could treat in green paint. College Boulevard, moving on to College Boulevard. College Boulevard is posted at 45 miles per hour per an engineering and traffic survey. College Boulevard is classified as an arterial street in the general plan mobility element. The mobility element recommends that, quote, vertical traffic calming techniques such as speed tables, humps, etc. should not be considered. So staff recommends that or staff has come to the conclusion that vertical deflection features such as speed tables not be considered. Horizontal deflection, the other way that we could provide traffic calming, would require a road diet, a reduction in the number of travel lanes, and that would, based on our estimation, result in a level of service degradation. And also, a byproduct would be diversion from an arterial street into neighborhood streets. Therefore, we don't recommend horizontal deflection in this case. What staff recommends are 6 to 8 permanent speed feedback signs to be deployed on College Boulevard between Cannon Road and Carlsbad Village Drive. Here's a list of some of the locations that we could consider for speed feedback signs. As you can see, we've for this graphic, we've considered 4 in the downhill direction and 3 in the uphill direction. An example of what the speed feedback signs look like. We do have a number of permanent speed feedback signs deployed throughout the city. The one on the right hand is currently existing on Aviara Parkway. And then moving on to Tamarack Avenue, the posted speed limit there is 30 miles per hour. It's classified as a neighborhood connector in the mobility element. And for a neighborhood connector, the mobility element recommends mid-block pedestrian crossings and traffic calming devices should be considered, but only at locations with high pedestrian activity levels or major destinations/attractions. So based on that guidance, staff recommends at the intersection of Tamarack Avenue and Valley Street, which we would consider a high pedestrian activity location based on the adjacent schools and athletic fields, staff would recommend curb extensions and to replace the rectangular rapid flashing beacon with a hybrid pedestrian signal. This would be the location of the proposed improvement, Tamarack Avenue at Valley Street. This is what a hybrid pedestrian signal looks like. It's something that we don't currently have in Carlsbad. It's in the California Manual on Uniform Traffic Control Devices as a a feature that agencies like Carlsbad could consider. The main difference between this and a normal traffic signal is that it does not have a green ball indication. When there are no pedestrians present, it's dark. And only when a pedestrian activates the signal, it'll go through the cycle of indications that you see there, starting with a flashing yellow, then a solid yellow, and then a red, which would require any vehicles to come to a legal stop. So it is one step more stringent than a rectangular rapid flashing beacon, which is simply a warning device. This is a legal requirement to stop when the indication is red. So in summary, we recommend on Carlsbad Boulevard and in-pavement flashing lights to augment the existing crosswalks along with curb extensions where feasible and striping improvements at Hemlock Avenue, Cherry Avenue, Maple Avenue, Sycamore Avenue, Oak Avenue, and the Army-Navy crosswalk. On College Boulevard, we recommend 6 to 8 permanent speed feedback signs. And on Tamarack and Valley Street, we recommend curb extensions and a hybrid pedestrian traffic signal. For next steps, our staff would proceed with CIP projects for these recommended improvements. Staff was asked specifically to reevaluate the recommendations for College Boulevard and then bring them to the Traffic and Mobility Commission for a future date. That concludes staff's presentation for this item. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Comments, questions, commissioners?
Question. Mr. Kim, I just had a question in regards to the College Boulevard from Carlsbad Village Drive to Canyon Road. Was there any reason that north of Carlsbad Village Drive to North Tamarack was not included in this?
We were specifically requested to focus on that segment of College Boulevard, but since then we've been working with concerned residents in the school, and one of the proposals that staff has is to extend that area consideration to Carlsbad from Carlsbad Village Drive north to the city limits, to include that as well in our recommendations when at a time when we bring that back to the Traffic and Mobility Commission. We'll include that segment as well.
So would I make a motion for City Council to recommend extending the border?
This is an information item, so when it does come back, you'll get that information, but this was just strictly to close the loop, as we promised. We're in a transition period, but this is just to get you information that was given to City Council. And as John had mentioned, when an item comes back with college, it'll come to you before going to council, so it will not go to council before coming to you.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
So on Tamarack, there's a region of interest, but then there's just the one intersection that was addressed, whereas on Carlsbad Boulevard and College Boulevard, there were measures that you had all along it. Were there concerns in other areas, or was I know the Valley Street intersection was one of the main concerns before, but were there other concerns along Tamarack?
We were asked to look at Tamarack Avenue from Skyline all the way to the coast, 101, based on some projects being proposed right now, particularly at Carlsbad Boulevard and Tamarack Avenue. There is a CIP project to look at that intersection for pedestrian improvements. And then the lack of traffic requests in the portion between Carlsbad Boulevard and I-5 we said that we're not recommending any proposed improvements along that stretch at this time. And then based on the mobility element recommendations to focus on the high pedestrian area, we looked at Tamarack Avenue and Valley Street.
Okay, and one more quick question. On College and Tamarack again, is the main concern pedestrian crossing? Is it that the 15% of cars that are traveling above that 85th percentile speed limit, are they going extremely fast? Or is there data indicating that cars are going extremely fast? Or is it a matter of the residents or somebody wants the speed limit reduced in general? Or is it red light running or some other? What was the specific, do you know what the specific concern is, or is it just a general?
There were a few specific concerns that were raised to us. One of them was the running of the traffic signals on College Boulevard. We inspected the signal indications, and then actually at Rift Road, there's a slight curve going northbound as you approach Rift Road. We identified a far side signal indication because you couldn't see the traffic signal until you rounded that curve. We implemented that, and we found the traffic signal equipment operating as expected. We have signal ahead signs in either direction for all the traffic signals on College Boulevard. The other concern was speeding, just a general observation of residents feeling the traffic speeds were too high. And so based on those concerns, I would assume that since we have an engineering and traffic survey that says that 85% are going at 50 miles per hour, it's probably the 15% that they would be concerned with, and therefore the speed feedback signs would be an appropriate improvement to address those concerns. And I do want to point out that we do have in the works, working with Doug and his signal staff, connecting our speed feedback sign system internally so that we would be able to draw data from them. We currently don't have the ability to do that. They're simply programmed and display. But with this proposed improvement, we'd be able to pull data from the speed feedback signs. And once implemented, we'd be able to get a better idea of when that 15% speeding would be occurring, and to work with the police department to provide focused enforcement along this boulevard. So I think that would increase the effectiveness of our speed feedback signs.
Thank you, appreciate the presentation and the explanations. Data is always good to have.
Any other comments?
So I have a question about Tamarack and Valley.
Could you speak in the microphone to me? Thank you.
I should turn it on also.
Yeah. There you go.
So my question is, so comparing this solution with the solution proposed at Cherry and Carlsbad Boulevard, Carlsbad Boulevard is a bigger street in my, and I imagine there's quite a bit. So what is about this that upgraded or made more strict control over that?
The fact that we presented to the Traffic and Mobility Commission a study with the multi-way stop analysis that we conducted, and that it met the multi-way stop analysis. We haven't conducted that on Carlsbad Boulevard, but based on what I know, it would not meet those types of guidelines to stop cars on Carlsbad Boulevard due to the relative low volume of the side streets. So that's one of the reasons why staff considered pedestrian hybrid signal is that it already met the guidelines for the pedestrian hybrid or for the always stop, and therefore that's an indication that the volumes on the side street are more in line with a stop control on Tamarack Avenue at Valley Street.
Now turning to college, actually I've heard from citizens, one of the concerns is the charging up the hill from the high school is an issue, and students presumably who are inexperienced drivers and that. So it's an interesting solution. I am curious about the feedback signs themselves, and you alluded to data collection. So this is not a criticism of the decision to put these in, because I think this is a good idea. But I am curious about, and I was going to ask you whether these are connected to anything, and they're not connected at this point. But you would not have to swap out the signs to do that data collection, for example. So I imagine there's an interface there somewhere that gets turned on and it gets implemented, or would you actually have to replace the signs with some other product in order to get the data collection capability?
It's my understanding that we wouldn't have to replace the signs, that it's a plug-in feature that we would purchase and install on existing speed feedback signs and then incorporate into any new speed feedback signs. We're not, like I've mentioned, we're not proceeding forward with the College Boulevard because of that specific request by council to come back with, they weren't quite satisfied with the speed feedback sign only recommendation. And so staff's currently looking at that to see if there's anything else that staff could recommend.
Yeah, I'm asking more interested in the technical aspect of this. So is it possible, is one of the plugins you could use, do you know if that would be a camera that you could put there to actually watch cars and perhaps collect personally identifiable information such as license plates?
As far as I know, there are no speed feedback signs that implement any cameras or recording devices. That's another entirely, photo enforcement is something that's not on the table at this point in time, and so they wouldn't be included as part of the recommended solutions.
Yeah, no, I'm just curious about whether, if I look through a catalog of this specifications for this sign, whether you could actually.
I haven't seen them, and we've looked at a lot of vendors, and I've never seen a speed feedback sign with a photo enforcement.
Okay.
Can we go back to the drawing on Carlsbad Boulevard where you showed the green bicycle lane treatment at that intersection? Okay, so as I understand it, the dashing, when the bike lane ends and the dashes are there, that's an indication that motorists need to pull into the close to the curb to make a legal right-hand turn. And when cyclists see a driver that's against the curb and getting ready to make that right-hand turn, the dashes allow them to leave the bike lane and pass on the left side. And is the intent here to change the way we legally go through this intersection when drivers are, is this going to help or confuse? I guess that's my question. To me, it would confuse at the moment. I see a lot of drivers that make the right-hand turn from basically the middle of that number 2 lane now. And will this cause more of them to make that turn from out there?
As far as I know, the green paint has no legal requirements on the driver or the bicyclist. It's simply an enhancement to highlight. And so that's all we would be doing, is highlighting a conflict area. in my opinion, it wouldn't change behavior in terms of cars going where there's gonna go to turn right, or bicyclists exiting or entering the bike lane. It's just simply highlighting, hey, this is an area for a vehicle to say, you know, to tell a vehicle there may be a bicyclist because it's bright and it's green.
It's gonna be interesting. Right now, I'd say that would confuse. And in fact, after a collision that occurred as a result of my presence in that bike lane, I no longer do that. I no longer ride there when I go north.
I'll double check with the METCDs to see if it has any recommendations in terms of green in conflict areas. That's something that staff assumed was one of the uses for the green paint.
Mm-hmm. Okay. With respect to College Boulevard, the recommendations for the speed flashing signs are fine, I think. I do notice, though, that there are a number of ways that that people could get to the school on decomposed granite trails that currently exist both on the east and west side. And one of them connects near the top of the hill on the west side, that if we considered perhaps a class 1 trail, just basically widen the sidewalk to allow people to access the school without having to ride in the street. I hear this from all kinds of cyclists. They don't like to ride in a very narrow bike lane on a high-speed street. And so I wondered if that was a consideration at all.
That's not something that we have considered, but we'll take a look at that. DG trail on the east side of College Boulevard.
Yeah, it connects at a right angle from a number of areas up in there that actually start way over at Tamarack near El Camino Real. So there's a huge area there that there are several trails that lead to College Boulevard and then just basically dead end there. So, you know, it would provide an opportunity for the kids to get to school by either walking or riding along that trail that's not just a sidewalk, but a multi-use trail. There's an existing trail on the other side that comes down from the lake area.
Okay.
And connects right near the school. It's not as improved. It's essentially a drainage trail. But the one on the west side seems like it might work.
I could get together with you to get more information specifically.
Sure.
And then we could maybe have a discussion with our staff.
We could coordinate that with our sustainable mobility plan, so possibly that's there, so maybe staff can take a look at those and see if there are potential additions to that plan. I think that's a direct, I would directly address your question.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your presentation. I thought it was very informative. I have a question though. I've been long confused about the designation of Carlsbad Boulevard to the north of the Agua Hedionda Lagoon as being an identity street. And then the further south is a coastal street. With me?
Yeah, I think it's mainly based on speed.
speed.
Yeah, the north portion is 30 miles per hour. It's
Right.
relatively low, but once you pass Palomar Airport Road, it's 4 lanes at 50 miles per hour, I want to say.
Right, but once you pass south of Tamarack, it goes to 35.
35.
And it's down to one street, or one lane.
1 lane.
So I'm assuming that the vehicle code says that the identity street is considered a non-residential area, is that correct?
Yeah, none of the Identity Street or coastal streets would be considered residential streets.
Okay. I was just always curious that the northern portion of the boulevard is 30 miles an hour, and it goes down to the southern, and it's only 1 lane. It increases to 35.
That was probably considered a transition link between the north portion, which has a certain characteristic, and then the southern portion, which has, you know, an equally strong characteristic, and then you've got that link between the two that runs along the lagoon.
Thank you.
It's primary purpose. It's really, they function about the same, but one is primary purpose is serving the village. So
Right, I saw
that's
that.
Closer to the
That's
village.
really the main thing. So you have a more of a village slant to any of your improvements.
I still find it odd. Okay, any other questions?